Hello, Marilyn. Welcome in.
Great. All right, we're going to get started. My name is Gail Green, and I have the pleasure of being the moderator of today's provocative talk. And I'd like to start by introducing our three panelists and before they take it away and engage us with some very thought-provoking ideas about golf and life and connection. So I'm going to start with Shoko Masuda, who comes to us from Connecticut. She's a leadership coach and training facilitator working with high potential females in various cultural contexts for leadership development, career acceleration, and transition. She reinforces coaching disciplines with 20 years of experience as a global leader in Fortune 100 companies of financial and healthcare industries. Known as a change agent, Shoko paved the way as the first woman from American Express, Japan, to take leadership roles outside the country. She lived and worked in Tokyo, Hong Kong, London, and New York. I have a golf fun fact for each of our panelists. And for Shoko, her fun golf fact is that at American Express, Japan, Shoko used to manage many golf events for premium card members, including the golf clinic with Isao Aoki, a Japanese legendary golfer.
Thank you, Gail.
Shoko.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. Next, we have Chip McFarlane, and he dubs us from Sydney, Australia. So we have a global panel here today. Chip is one of Australia's first and most experienced executive coaches. He has coached internationally in the US, London, China, Singapore, Paris, Delhi, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Ethiopia, and Australia across a broad spectrum of industries. Having worked with C-suite, managing partners, board members, senior executives, and importantly, their teams, Chip believes in the importance of helping a team move beyond high performance to high value adding for all of its stakeholders, including the earth. I love that. In the domain of coaching development, Coach is one of the founders and senior faculty of one of the preeminent coaching training organizations in the Asia Pacific region, the Institute of Executive Coaching and Leadership. Chip's fun golf fact: it's a lovely aspiration for me. Welcome, Chip.
Thank you very much, Gail. Thanks.
And lastly, we have Jerome Green, who is a leadership and life coach and also involved in elite high school basketball. Jerome has spent the pandemic in a year of self-discovery, and that's what he brings to his clients. Jerome has an extensive background in providing insights and awareness into the importance that perspective and process play in behavioral change. Jerome reinforces the concept of leading from the heart and why it's essential to stay open during the conflict. Jerome has worked with small and large companies in executive coaching, leadership, personal development, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Jerome's golf fun fact: he lives a half mile from his local golf course, and 28 years ago, he wrote a humorous golf book called On the Green. His lowest score ever, 75, and his highest, 120, speaks to the range he can go to with his clients. Golf to Jerome is a metaphor for life, which led to the development of this Outlier session with his two companions. Welcome, Jerome.
Thanks, Gail. And yes, Gail and I are related. I'll let you figure out how.
Very, like 30 plus years.
Yeah.
So for all of you, if you have questions, thoughts, concerns, ideas, comments, you can just put them in chat. And at some point along the way, we will be having some Q&A time.
Thank you, Gail. We're planning this to go an hour, and we'll leave time for Q&A and different things. And I want to start with that this is not really about golf as much as it is about life and the process of life. And what I have really discovered from golf, which my father started me on golf when I was about 8 years old. And I didn't actually play golf until 30 years later. But my father worked at a factory back in New York. It was called the Rockaway Meadow. And he walked past a golf course called the Inwood Golf Course. And it was a renowned golf course. They had a US Open, and he would find these balata balls and he would bring them home to me. And I would look at him and go, Dad, what am I gonna do this? This is not a basketball, this is not a football. What do I need with this ball? And he goes, oh, just take it, it's fun. So my friends and I would just go around and we would bounce them high. We would go to the top of our building, we lived in the projects. And we didn't want to hurt anyone, so we just found a clear space and we just drop them from the roof and see them explode. That was golf. I had a track coach in high school that tried to introduce me to golf. And I go, that's a slow game. Why would I want to play that? And at the time, so when I was 8, so in 1961, that wasn't an event or an activity that I was much welcome to other than being a caddy. And so 30 years later, I found myself learning to play golf. And the minute I touched a golf club and I missed my first golf ball on the driving range, I fell in love with the game. And I fell in love with the game because I just felt it was an instrument that was going to provide me with a lot of life lessons. And that's been my process with the game for the last 30 years. This event today was motivated by watching this past year's Masters. And I was really touched on an emotional level, feeling level, with watching Matsuyama win the Masters. And immediately I said, well, I need to write an article about this, because it was at a time when the George Floyd trial was on. Lee Elder, who had been denied entry into the Masters, even though he had qualified, he had to wait 4 or 5 years to really play in the Masters. He got honored. And then all this Asian hate was going on in the States. And then Matsuyama wins. And I'm going, wow, there's something in this. And so initially I was going to write an article about it. And ultimately I then, in the same breath, thought, you know what? I'm going to reach out to Chip and Shoko and see if they would do a panel discussion with me about this. And this is how this came about. So right now, I just want to show you a quick clip. And
there is some celebration going on right now halfway around the world. It's just after 8 o'clock in the morning back in Japan. Japan rejoices. It's a glorious new day as Hideki Matsuyama has won the Masters tournaments.
so when I saw that, I was really moved. And the piece that really moved me was the caddy, how he acknowledged the course. And I'd never seen a caddy in the States, in the world. I've been watching golf for a long time, do that. And to me, it was a recognition of Matsuyama's journey, but also the respect that he had for the course. And what I love about golf is that, for me, it really makes me look at leadership. It makes me look at how I see the world. It makes me look at my own vulnerabilities. It makes me look at things that I necessarily, my own character. Do I want to move the ball and cheat a little bit? All those things. So I want to open it up to Shoko and Chip. And one awareness that I had today while I was on the range was that in this whole arena of DEI, there isn't room to practice. In the coaching industry and in basketball and sports or whatever it is, there's all this conversation about practice. And I thought about this today, that in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, no one has the room to or allow it to practice. This whole political correctness that you have to get it right, you have to say the right words, you have to say the right thing, you can't look the wrong way or mispronounce something or not know who's woke and who's not woke. And I just thought that that's sort of incongruent with the rest of life, because the rest of life is about practice and it's about making mistakes, it's about learning. The reason that I love golf is that I get to look at my mistakes, and not only on the golf course, but in my life. And I look and I get to learn, I get to grow, I get to develop. So I just want to open it up to Chip and Shoko and just start with that conversation about practice.
Shoko, go ahead.
So thank you, Jerome, for really invited, Chip and myself to this, forum. It's a really fun topic to talk about. And when you say this in a practice, I have to first ask you that what do you think about this practice is for the individual, like, people who's, people of color, so to speak, that they feel like, oh, I cannot make a mistake. I have to be perfect. That I see among, minority people like myself, that particularly in the organization, I feel like, oh, I cannot make a mistake because I have to be perfect. And that often I heard from my client who's minority side of it. But also that I'm hearing, Jerome, that is also related to the systemic or the organization side of it. I just, first put that question onto the table to just, get, what are you thinking on that? But also, Chip, you may also have some other observations since you are in the different parts of the world.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think part of the challenge in the space where people engage with political correctness, then you find that sometimes there is very little leeway for someone to pronounce something incorrectly or to use a bit of humor that maybe may not hit that type of audience or that individual, and offense is taken to it very soon, very quickly. But as you were saying, Shoko, part of what happens with managers in an organization today, what I'm noticing in a variety of places, is that they don't want their people to make mistakes. They make them all the time. They just say, I can't let them make it. She can't make a mistake. He can't make a mistake. My direct reports can't make mistakes. They got to get it right. But they're making, they're making mistakes all the time. They just hide them very well. And I hope my boss doesn't see it. They hide it well. So you find that it's there. It's there both in a business sense of things, because stakes every year seems to be getting higher. The gradient is getting higher. And do I feel that I have the space on one side to make mistakes? And as you mentioned, I've had many women and many men from different backgrounds who've said, I feel as though there's a lot of eyes on me. And if I make a mistake, I represent, it's like I'm the archetype for this group. So if I make a mistake, it could reflect off into the rest of the group. And I don't want to be that person that does that.
Yeah, I think that I love what you said, Chip, about that it's a US issue more than maybe an international issue. It's an issue that I think in our country, we have gotten to a point where we have no flexibility, or we have limited flexibility. Our biggest thing is we like to cancel people. We cancel people every day. Cancel. And I can't say that. Sometimes I look at how people get fired or people get canceled, and I wonder what learning has really taken place. Is if we keep just canceling people and firing people, are we going to really grow? in the world of golf, in golf, you hit the ball into the trees, and you got to figure out how to get out of the trees. You just don't go, well, the game's over. I hit it in the trees. Go home. I hit it in the sand. Oh, I'm horrible in the sand. Go home. You just got to keep playing. You have to keep going. And in basketball, that's really, really true. And that the game is so quick and fast. So I think sports provides, at least for me, and I see that Nick Booker is on this call, and he's a basketball coach, and he can attest to this, that it's really not about perfect, because the game is a beautiful game, but it's not a perfect game, and it's a game of imperfection. And golf is a game of imperfection. And so as we tend to really want to grow, and I'm not looking at really behavior that's totally out of bounds. I'm just looking at the general population of people, which makes up most of us, and how we're not allowed to be vulnerable. We're not allowed to make mistakes. We're not allowed to learn from our mistakes. The minute you say something or do something, it seems wrong. So, Shoko, I think that, back to your original question, I think it is systemic. I think it is individual. I think it is difficult for people as a manager, a director, a VP, CEO. I love what you said, Chip, about the fact that upper level, they make mistakes all the time. And then they have these policies about everybody that's underneath them that can't make mistakes. And right now in the whole corporate space, everybody's trying to come up with a policy. There's a policy. There's a policy. And the policy is not going to change behavior. It's going to be action. And how do we take action?
I think, if I may just, a little bit add to that, because when you say system, I watched the Masters. I was so excited because as a Japanese, I just feel like, wow, right? And Masters is such a space, it's such a tradition, but also that could be very exclusive, space. So I just wanted to bring up some of the anecdotal, conversation that I heard in Japanese TV stations interview about Matsuyama. He won the Masters amateur, section 10 years ago. 10 years ago, he already that talented, but it took him 10 years to get that, the actual winning this year. And one of the commentators said that the reason it took him 10 years is because that he didn't reach out to Tiger Woods. He didn't, reach out to whoever the previous winners, because he was introverted, but he just didn't feel that he could get some help from those, great people. So to me, that was such an unfortunate missed opportunity for Matsuyama to accelerate his learning, accelerate his growth, simply because that he didn't go out. But that is not only his personality or introverted issues, but also that could be something to do with that sort of an environment to, I think that, you said, belonging. He may not feel he belonged to that organization. He belonged to that, group of people, despite the fact that he had that talent. So that's, to me, it's sort of both things, isn't it? And that you really have to encourage each individual to step up, but also this organizationally, they also figured it out to open up, to create that inviting or belonging sense. I just put that because that's what I heard from the interview, and I got so shocked.
Well, I think, Shoko, I think that's very true in some elements of things where, but if I just compare that with Naomi Osaka, okay, so she did that. She hit the scene differently, and it didn't take 10 years for her to move to prominence. It took a little bit, but didn't take quite 10 years. But she didn't. So from your exposure to her, what's the difference of those two athletes those two experts in what they do. How would you compare them?
So I was curious about, Naomi as well, because if you remember first time she won US Open, she cried. She was just overwhelmed. Even she played so well against her idol, Serena Williams. And then after that, what happened, Jerome, I think LA is such a magic place. She moved to LA, yeah? And she got mentor like Brian Kobe. And I think that really make her perspective totally different. And she said in some of the article in Vogue or somewhere that she said, now I realized that I have a platform. There are people who would listen to me. I think that created a huge sense of confidence, but also responsibility in herself, so that she's definitely stepping up. And I think that how she see her community open up when she moved to LA, there's a more support system she has. I think that's a huge difference.
Yes, so cool. Those are really good points. And I'm going to go back to your original statement because we can't talk about the Masters without talking about its history of discrimination. That has a long-standing history. It's in the South, and it's in a community where my father actually grew up, maybe 10 miles from there. And at 18 years old, he had to leave Georgia, the state of Georgia, not because he did anything other than to ask for vanilla ice cream, and which was not allowed. Only that Black people could only ask for vanilla ice cream on July 4th. And some men came to my grandmother's home and said, you probably need to get Moses out of here. So people are really upset, and I don't know what's going to happen. So he had to leave the next day and go to New York and with his brother over vanilla ice cream. So there's a history there. But what I really appreciate about the Masters is that, just as you said, once Lee Elder finally was allowed to play in it, it opened up the doors, and it gave us some examples. And one of the things that we need in this whole space within organizations, within society, are examples of people willing to take the chance, willing to step into a space that's not comfortable, maybe not accepted, and just keep moving forward. And Lee Elder did that. He took Jack Nicklaus to 5 extra holes in a tournament, and he still wasn't accepted into the Masters. So he waited a few years before he got in. So discrimination is part of the Masters, but it's sort of a microcosm of the greater society in the US. And the reason that I love having the two of you on this panel is because you have given me a different perspective, a world perspective, that I can't say that I really had. And one of the things that Chip said in one of the conversations that we had last week, and when we talked about people of color, and Chip said, I'm gonna let Chip talk about that. Talk about that, Chip.
No, it's one of the things that I like about this, the phrases, because there are a lot of categories and titles and little ways of categorizing people that we find, labels that we find are useful at times and also not useful. And the conversation of people of color and it depends on, for me, to a great degree, it depends on how limited or expansive you make that statement. Because typically, initially it was used for people whose skin were darker color. So you're Black, you're Latino, you're a variety of things inside that space. And something I found interesting recently was with the Academy Awards, the director who won Best Director, suddenly the phrase that was used in the newspaper is "a woman of color wins." So I think something that's also thrown into the marketing mix out there with things that are going on. But I like in physics. In physics, you have a whole spectrum of colors, and white is included in there, and yeah, black and white, and a variety of things in between each other within the visible spectrum of color. So our ability to include or exclude others, I think, will make a difference in terms of how we interact within organizations also, as we jump around and we are more international in terms of our exposure, where we're going, what we're doing. Just the idea that white is in the spectrum, it's in the spectrum, it's part of it. Although I do think that the reason that the phrase came up was to bring attention to something that was happening to part of our community. And that's why it held that for that while, because it was bringing attention to a part of the community. Everyone's included. It's like when they have Black Lives Matter and others, people say all lives matter. All lives do matter, but the reason they're saying Black Lives Matter right now is because it's just bringing attention to something that's happening to part of the community. So if you say all lives matter, wonderful. Where's your stand for that person who's just shot or injured or whatever over there? So for me, there's that interesting dance that goes through this.
I think that's very interesting. And, last time we talked, when Chip said that, and also that you bring in the idea of in group, out of group. And I think that concept to me is very resonated, because when we using the term, people of color, definitely that there's some divided line that are you, which group are you in? And when you're looking at the spectrum, there's no such a division in clear way. So, but at the same time, I do agree that, certain situation like now that, there's a certain incident, tragic incident happen. So that term sometimes is very helpful to focus on what's going on, to really sort of bubbling up the issues. Otherwise, it would be like, under the carpet, so to speak. Yeah. But I really think that our thinking is always where I belong, why I belong. And that's the creating the tribal, concept, or exclusivity or inclusivity things.
Jerome, I have a question for you, just based on something that Shoko just said, where you work with high school students, and high school athletes, elite athletes in the high school basketball space. And so in working in the inner city and working with a variety of different communities, you would have encountered some of your athletes who you would challenge them to think about, there's a bigger world out there. You've exposed them to the possibility of a bigger world, aside from other teams that they're competing against. There's a bigger world out there. What have you noticed about the reception of different athletes, different people, to even just talking about there is our community and there's a bigger world out there? What have you noticed of the difference of how people receive that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Chip. What I've noticed is that depending on the social economic factors, determine some decisions on how people see it. But it's about, if there's been an athlete who has been in extreme poverty all of their life, and they have been told that the only way that they can get out of that poverty is through sports or drugs, and sports starts to fail, or they did not reach the level that they think was going to get them into the NBA or get them into a professional career, they may take the easier way out, which appears to them the easier way out, which is could be around crime, could be around doing something illegal. It's real difficult, challenging to have those conversations. And then there's other athletes who that I work with who are Black, white, brown, and they still have the same struggle. And their struggle is having a very narrow view of what their possibilities are. They've been pigeonholed into, if I don't make it to as a Division I athlete, then I've failed, or I've not been a success. And we had a conversation last night with an athlete about, did he love playing basketball? And if he loved playing basketball, it didn't matter where he went. just go play. But the struggle that I've seen in the inner city has been, it's really hard to make that pivot or to make that transition into something else. Sports has a very limiting opportunities. You know, the NBA is like 1.5% of people make it there. But even in the business of sport, it's still a small percentage. And giving those opportunities of going into design, going into marketing, going into someplace, it seems like an insurmountable task. So it's easier to just say, well, you know what? You know, on my block, people have been successful doing this, and that's going to be easier for me.
It's interesting because I see that in a couple of ways, as Shoko had mentioned, in terms of systemically thinking around that. Because if I compare some of that experience to the difference between, let's say, Matsuyama and Osaka, and whereas one, they said, well, why didn't you reach out to Tiger? Stay within the box and reach this way. And as Shoko mentioned, Osaka reached out to Kobe Bryant in basketball. So it wasn't in tennis. She wasn't just chasing after tennis grades. She stepped outside of that and built relationships and a broader community around herself that was more than that. So for me, there's also an element of, if you look at the work of, let's say, Suzanne Cook-Greuter or Bill Torbert or Keegan and Leahy around adult development, the perception of their worldview and where each of those individuals, where their worldview sits as to what is possible. Is it conventional or is it outside of the convention? Am I sitting at a level where I perceive, ooh, that's possible also, and so is this, and so are these other things? Or do I only stay within this lane, within that convention?
I think that's a very good point. You know, how you would open up your horizons, just, you know, not in that in an expert area. But this one is also very true if you in the organization, right? If you really doing that data analysis, you're good at it and you just, you know, dive into it. But can you just, you know, open up a little bit to see other things? Then you could be much better, you know, data analytics, you know, person in a much more rounded. But that really takes a courage to out of the, you know, box. I think that's somewhere I always wondering that, you know, how we could help people to do that. Particularly, I tell you that because I'm Asian, and Asian always has certain, you know, perspective. We have to be polite. I think Jerome said that the Caddy or, you know, Matsuyama, the Caddy, sort of bowed, you know, Japanese or most of the Asian people are very polite, you know, not to do anything outrageous like we, you know. So I think that's, you know, one of the cultural, you know, hurdle to say that it is okay. And also this one related to Jerome's, you know, point of the practicing and not try to be perfect, but just, you know, practicing and the learning it, you know, that's the really component in that. How, because I'm coming from Asian culture, it is very hard as a society, Asian society, that always, you know, not allow, give us a space to make a mistake and to say it's okay. So, you know, I'm just, you know, going around, I mean, mumbling, but I just put that because that's my observation when I look at that situation.
Well, it's Shoko, it's very interesting that you said that, because as you were speaking, I realized that one aspect of why I practice is my curiosity. My curiosity of like, how much better can I get? How much can I hit a pure shot? If I hit a pure shot, if the feeling that goes along with that is amazing. So, you know, our curiosity around this whole issue of race and culture is stunted by all of these opinions and beliefs about who we should be, we're getting pulled. As a Black man, I'm pulled in, well, you got to think this way, you know, you have to think this way. No, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And for me, I've never been a person that wants to be pigeonholed into one aspect of who I was. And yeah, I know I'm Black. I know I've had to learn how to navigate this world as a Black man. But at the end of the day, is my curiosity about the world. And I remember being in 5th grade and I was in art class and I was singing Beatles songs, Three Dog Night, some other songs when I did art. And I got called into a conference by my Black friends in the class. And they said, we need to talk to you. I go, about what? They go, well, why are you singing all those white songs? I go, what? White songs? Oh, you're talking about the Beatles? I go, yeah. I go, well, it kind of helps me when I do my art. I go, well, what about the Supremes? What about the Temptations? I go, I like them too. They don't go well with my art. And they were like, oh, that's unbelievable. You're a traitor. You're this and you're that. And that was when I realized that I was, I was an outlier, that I was different. And it took me a long time to process that. I went through my period of reading Baldwin and being on the subways in New York and being very angry at white people and reading all these different issues, Malcolm X. And then my curiosity still kicked in. But that's what's always been with me. I'm just curious about how the world works. And my curiosity isn't necessarily looking for answers. Matter of fact, I don't want people to give me answers. I just want them to open the door so I can try to discover myself.
That's one of the things that we do as coaches, though, and it hits two parts of that. One is practice, because in the room, we create that safe space, or we provide a safe space for people to be able to practice stuff. And also to foster their curiosity, putting them into tasks that generate more of that, and then challenging in terms of their learning along the process to be able to pick that stuff up and to do something with it. So part of our job and our responsibility in the stuff that we do as coaches also sits very strongly inside of there, creating the type of environment that allows a woman to express herself differently. She may be in Japan, she may be in China, she may be in Singapore, and within the overall general community of her culture. And yet she wants to try some things differently, because she wants it. If she's pushing out into a multinational organization, she's going to need to be perceived differently at times from everyone else. Otherwise, she blends in with the wallpaper. So we provide those spaces. Well, that's the intention, is that we provide the spaces to be able to do that stretching and falling down and doing things. But it also challenges us as coaches that our perspective has to be curious enough, broad enough, wide enough to be able to ask the questions, or to create the environment that allows for that to happen, for the curiosity to truly be there. So it's our challenge in addition to that.
I have to say that I wish I had Chip for my coach when I was at the organization to get that kind of help, because I find that it's incredibly hard for Asian women to cut into the Western organization to speak up, and and yet keep my original culture. And that's a really hard thing to figure it out. And I think this is something that I, yesterday or the day before, I had my mentor coach talking about that. It's really going to the identity threat. In other words, that who am I issue. And I think that's, to me, like, oh, gee, yeah, right,
Now we had Daniel just shot two pieces of information, or two questions, I think, that he put out there, that we might want to tackle one of those and bring it into the conversation. So Gail, can you see the chat in there?
Yeah, we have a question from Daniel, and we also have a question in Q&A from Ting Singh. So let's start with Ting, because that was here first. How do you support a group of people who came from a country where work is about surviving to work with a group of people who came from where work is about living. The two different mindsets put people at two extremes end of the scales, and that's where conflict can arise.
So it's interesting where it's something that Gerald Jerome had actually mentioned a little bit earlier in one of our conversations around tackling things on an individual level within the greater context. So it's, for me, there's the space of you're talking to groups of people, and yet it's not the group we're working with at times. Sometimes it's just the individual and their comfort with something, increasing their space, their perception. And it's wonderful how sometimes by one person moving, they influence a whole bunch of other people. They may not change all of society in one day or 1 month, and yet they begin to have an influence where people see, ooh, something might be different. There's the touching into, start with an individual and possibly provide that space with them, explore that, create the curiosity for other than our own as a possibility. So.
Yeah, I agree with Chip. You know, I think for there to be change, there has to be, you have to move away from groupthink, and you have to be an example. There's if you think about all the things and all the people, the men and women that inspire you, they are individuals who have, they may come from a respective group, but they're individuals who have demonstrated on some level this ability to thrive. And so in survival, the whole mentality there is just like, how do I just get by? And people that thrive. And I don't know if he is mentioning, if he's talking about oppressive behavior or just a different approach. But I just know that what Chip is saying, if you can be an example, I just did a workshop the other day, and it was all about examples and perspectives. And I showed a couple of clips around athletes and different people that were examples and that we cheer, and that we can be an examples in our own individual lives. And so my whole goal in my life is like, how can I be an example of being willing to go out there and to be willing to explore, to be willing to fall down, to be willing to break away from the groupthink and into this process. And what I found is, just like when you said Osaka, when she was an example, you know, because when she first won the US Open, she got booed because she beat Serena. And there was a whole thing, and Serena, you know, comforted her. And that was a real breakthrough for her, because she had to overcome the emotional and the rejection in some ways. And she, even though she won, she still didn't belong. And she had to fight for that. She had to fight to belong. And then once she fought and people knew that she had a left and a right uppercut, then they go, okay, well, you're in. And I think in order for us to, we have to own our space. We have to say, I'm walking here. I belong here. And I'm not waiting for you to accept me. I'm not trying to be a cultural fit. I'm trying to be a cultural add-on. I'm adding to your company. I'm adding to your environment. I'm adding to your economy. I'm not subtracting. And that's been the belief for a lot of people in America, that if you do affirmative action or you do this, you're subtracting. No, it's an add-on. There's some brilliant people that are from very walks of life, and they add to the culture. They don't subtract.
Great. That was beautiful. So we have another question. Daniel asks, do you think tolerance and understanding can happen more quickly and profoundly inside of companies? It seems like society at large moves so slowly. That was his first, and he has a second one too, but start there.
I think that's interesting. I like the image that I get from that is an interesting one, because I think in terms of product development within an organization, Remember, Lockheed years ago wanted to create a supersonic aircraft, the SR-71, the Blackbird. But within their overall organization, the overall organization was just, it wouldn't have fitted inside of there. So they created Skunk Works. You know, it's a little organization off to the side where it was a bit more entrepreneurial, quicker moving, doing a variety of things. They came up, so within the larger organization, they still had to cornerize it, create a little area for something different to really happen with the production of a new idea. So I say inside smaller companies, yes, because they can be much more fast moving depending on the woman or the man who's leading the effort, leading the charge, and creating the environment.
I totally agree. And also that the recent, example could be Microsoft. When Satya Nadella took over, he asked entire organization, every employee to read the book, Nonviolent Communication. And that was very symbolic gesture because that nonviolent conversation really encouraged people to listen deeply, not talk first. Prior to him, Microsoft, culture was know it all, meaning is that you should not ask any question in the organization and in the meeting because you're supposed to know everything. But after Satya took over that organization, he really switched the organization, the culture to learn it all, which is that much more growth mindset organization and much kinder in a sense, and more curious mindset. And I think that was, you see the organization's, the performance after he took over. And of course, strategic decision was there, but that culture switch was first and foremost have to go to from the top and really demonstrate that leader's behavior. As Jerome said, he really modeled that behavior.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I'm answering that question, but that was my observation.
I think one of the things that when we talked about doing this webinar was that we didn't have the answers. We had a lot of questions, and we were going to practice this process with you, and so that's my whole journey at this point in my life. Is all about just what am I curious about? What do I want to explore? I'm not waiting for permission from no one. I don't care about the big organizations that who's ever in charge of coaching. I just don't care, because at this point in my life, it's certainly about me having fulfillment and joy. And so having this moment with the two of you and having Gail moderate it is fulfilling for me. I'm not waiting for someone to say, okay, Chip, okay, Jerome, we now accept you. You now can come in and play with us. No, I'm going to go ahead and play, and I don't care.
If you want to play, you can come along. It's okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think that's a very good point, though, that, if you really wanted to change, let's start from there, from you, right? That's what I'm hearing from Jerome. And I like that, because this is absolutely the concept of the practice that you said, that don't try to be perfect. Try something. Try something small to see how it works. It works great. Do more, right?
Yeah, I
like that.
Yeah, I would say one thing about tolerance, at least my feeling on it, is something that I try not to do. I try not to tolerate anything, because if I tolerate it over time, at some point I get sick of it. So what I have to do is I may have to purify it. Somebody may throw some real junk at me. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Words hurt. Okay, we know that they do. But how do I lift it? How do I do that? So tolerance for me is something that I try not to be a part of, because it doesn't really change anything for me. That's my perspective. I really don't try, and I don't have the word that I don't have the definition or the word that I would use instead of tolerance. But I think it's just the ability to listen. And like you said, Shoko, it's like listening. Yesterday, I had a former player who passed away, and I had to call their parents, his parents and his grandfather, and there was this moment of where I didn't have words. I just called and I said, I don't have words. Those are the exact words that I use. I do not have words. The grandfather had all the words I needed. For 5 minutes, he had all the words, and it was beautiful. And I left that call with an awareness that, because up until that moment, I've always been fearful of having those conversations when somebody has passed. What do you say? And then I realized it was such freedom. Like, I don't have to have words. I just have to show up and have my heart, be there, be present. And he had the words. And if he didn't have any words, if we'd been silent for 5 minutes, that would have been fine. And I translated that to coaching. And I translated that to this issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes we think the words are going to make changes. They very rarely do. It's really what we do and what we listen and a willingness to listen.
You know, it's beautiful what you just said, Jerome. In some ways, it's the beginning or maybe one of the answers or a thought about the second question Daniel had, or a statement. He said, I'm curious about what will help all colors to live, work, and love on this planet.
Yeah, it's an interesting one where you have this our definition of humanity, of who we consider, as Shoko had mentioned before, our in-group and our out-group. Who do we consider our in-group? Our in-group can be as inclusive as only our family. Our in-group can be as inclusive as people whose skin color appears as us. Our in-group can be as expansive as everyone, all humanity across the world is part of my in-group. So depending on those things, our perception around what we consider as part of that, I think makes a difference for our ability to be able to live together differently.
I think this question is a very, big one. If we could have that answer, we would be very happy, right? But I think, I would say this, that it would be beautiful. It would be beautiful that everybody want to mutually flourish in the community. I think this, I stuck this word, mutually flourishing. That is such a thing. And I think, Jerome said that this is not just, zero-sum game. It's not subtracting something when you get, no, it's just add on how we could create that no matter what kind of color of the skin you might have. And I think that's a journey, not only in the US, every part of the world. I think that's such a concept that that's probably, everybody's, mission of life, how we could achieve that mutually flourishing state of mind. It's really to me, the mindset.
As you three have been talking, I keep hearing Michael Jackson's song, I'm looking at the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And I think some of what you're talking about is that being able to ask ourselves to go in. And I think that mutual flourishing is, going in and looking at ourselves and allowing ourselves, starting with me, change, let me change.
Yeah, Gail, why don't you talk about a little bit of what you learned about unconscious bias a week or so ago?
I'm also a leadership coach and presentation skills coach, and I was working with an individual who was going for a job interview. He was a basketball coach who was up for an opportunity to be a head coach. He was an assistant coach, hoping to be a head coach. So we're working with him. He needed to put together a 10-minute video that described how he was going to approach teaching defense. Anyway, so we worked through it. He got through the first interview, great. Second interview, he was in his final, Anyway, he didn't get the job, but he said he learned a lot, and he said he felt he presented really well. So afterwards, I thought, wow, I'd love to have a recommendation from him. And then I said, well, I don't know, maybe he probably doesn't write real well. You know, maybe I could write something and send it to him. And then Jerome said, he's got his PhD. And my mouth dropped to the floor. So in my brain, a coach, I didn't even know this, a coach may not be a good writer because, you know, they're physical, they're just they're about the sport. He probably doesn't have those other skills. When he said he had a PhD, I mean, and so Jerome said, do you see what you had going on inside here? Possibly wouldn't write me a good recommendation. Anyway, that really opened me up to, you know, a simple thing that it probably, if Jerome hadn't pointed it out, I wouldn't have even noticed it.
Mm-hmm. And that speaks to the whole thing where we started about the practice and being able to in the workforce and in corporations, that conversation or something or that sort of unconscious bias might have led to, you know, going to HR, you know, just saying, oh, she said this and she did this and they did this. And so just being able to have those conversations and clarity, providing clarity for people, I think is really important. And, you know, we're living in a very uncertain